And welcome. This is Sunday, so you know what day it is. It's time for our stream about World War One. This week we are talking about October 1914. MC, go ahead and take it away from here and set the stage as usual. You know the format. You do everything. I just go,
Okay. All right. So battles are happening across Europe. All right. Obviously, and for the most part, the Germans are still on the advance. All right. They've been pushing things now. Their big advance to the south against the French has, for all intents and purposes, stalled. All right. For a variety of reasons, not the least of which is because so many of their units were moved to the east to deal with the Russian situation. All right, but on the West Coast, you have. Let me try and share this. Hold on a second. On the West Coast, you have this. You have this situation, and this covers a pretty wide range of dates starting from September 18th. But you can see what is beginning to happen now. All right. Now, there's two things that I think that you really need to note. First of all, right here, you'll notice Antwerp. All right, Antwerp was being defended by the British. It becomes untenable. Right, they know it's going to become untenable, and they're going to retreat. It hasn't happened yet, but it's going to. And this red line is the British BEF. Okay, and they're actually going to push clear back here before they go back on the counterattack to stabilize these lines. But prior to that,
real quick though,
mm-hmm.
how close was it? Because they're at the race to the sea, and you can see by the map that they hit the sea. How close was it? The British almost got captured, right? They were almost stuck behind enemy lines.
It in fact really wasn't all that close when you consider that by the time we're getting around to this stage here, this entire end of the swinging flank is starting to see the strains of their supply lines and getting stretched out pretty far. So they're starting to slow down quite a bit. And this is where the BEF was able to hold them back so much because, well, they were starting to stall anyway.
Right now, and that's exactly correct. The supply lines now are being stretched quite thin. All right, as far as the ability to move munitions. All right, and also move troops. You got to remember, most troops still at this point in time, all right, aren't being transported by rail. Most of these people are walking. Okay. When you see all of this movement here, it isn't being done by rail. They are on foot. Okay, so the Germans who were clear out this other end over here, right? They've been walking throughout this entire time. Boom here, and then they're being told, okay, come back here, resupply a little bit, and then go back marching up here again, and then resupply and go marching up here again. This is the vast majority of this movement is taking place not on vehicles yet. All right, they're being taken place by people basically pounding the ground. You're walking from point A to point B, shoe leather express.
They got horse and carts if they're lucky.
Well, yeah, that's true. There is that too. But really, the mechanization as far as a mechanized unit hasn't happened yet. You don't really have mechanized units at this point in time. So you see this retreat. How close was it? It wasn't really that close, but at the same time, what you have right here at Arras is you have the French have built up a reserve enough of a reserve force, all right, to blunt this counterattack, okay, by the Germans. And this begins now, okay, both sides swinging, they hit, counter hit, they hit, counter hit, all the way up to where the British then come back. And actually, you have a cavalry unit, all right, from the Germans have actually taken wipers or yeeps or yippes, however you call it, and yeeps, and then you have them pushing this back. Now, the land detail over here is basically, this is farmland. This isn't the hedgerow country that you're going to see in Normandy or anything like that. Okay, this is basically open farmland, very little in the way of forested land like it is at the southern end down in this area. This area was heavily forested initially. Right. So you're not battling through a lot of trees. You can see for miles and miles. And this area especially is absolutely flat for the most part. If there's a small rise of a few hundred feet, all right, it's considered the high ground.
Okay. I know this is a stupid question, but bear with me here. Politically, is there any way that the Germans would and the other powers could have just stopped here? I mean, like, you know what? That's the new lines for Europe. We're done. We've already seen hundreds of thousands die, and it's only been a couple months. This is going to be bad, guys.
No, it's
Nope.
on now.
Nope. There is no stopping here. Okay, you got to think about the way the Germans were looking at this. Okay, and the Germans aren't even looking at this as, they look at it as the battle against the French, the battle against the British. There's different aspects of it. They're spoiling for a fight with the British Navy, not with the British Army, but they are spoiling for a fight with the British Navy. They have no respect for the French army, okay, and they're absolutely terrified of what the Russians can do if they finally get mobilized. So for the European powers, for the Western powers to say, well, let's stop here, okay, the Germans at this point probably would have went, okay, we'll do that. But the French power, France, there was no way France was going to sit up there and cede territory. Their mindset is yeah, the Germans might be tough, but we're just as badass. That's their mentality.
Yeah, but the Germans are what, 400 miles from Paris?
Well,
Why would you want to risk Paris?
Well, they've already secured Paris, so what are they worried about? Paris is safe. They want to push the Germans off of French soil.
Fair enough.
And the British at this point,
jump in whenever you feel comfortable to.
And
all right, go ahead.
And the British at this point are of the mindset of, okay, we got into the war because we were trying to secure the independence of Belgium. Unless the Germans say, okay, we'll back off of Belgium, then we're going to be here for the long haul. And let's be quite frank about something else. The British fleet is looking to take on the high seas fleet of the Germans as well. They're looking to say, okay, you guys want to be the Billy Badasses coming up? Well, we're going to put you in your place. So at this point in the war, neither side's willing to back down.
Yeah, no, and Jensen, anything you feel like adding? And where was your relative? Because I know that's what we wanted to talk a little bit about today. So I'm just wondering, are we there yet?
I was told, okay, that yes, that's exactly where he was, around the Passchendaele area. Now, just so you know, okay, the thing with him was he was 13 when he went over. He lied about his age so as he could go and fight for Britain. That is how fucking insane the dude was. He was basically he was helping the artillery trains, pulling the cannons around. So technically he wasn't in the battle, but let's be fair, they may be artillery, but they didn't exactly have the range that the shit we got nowadays has. So, he was close enough to the front that during his time, the poor bastard ended up breathing mustard gas. That shit messed him up for the rest of his life. According to the family, when he'd come home, he'd just be sitting there coughing, and every once in a while, because obviously back in those days, people would cough into hankies and shit. You'd actually see bits of dead lung in the hanky. How gross is that?
Oh yeah. Now we'll talk more about the poison gas later, but mustard gas is nasty shit. Okay. For one thing about mustard gas, which is different than many of the other types of weaponry gas that were used, is it's not lighter than air. Okay. It sinks. And this was done with a specific mindset of hitting the trenches, and then the deep in areas of those trenches, all right, would slowly fill with the gas as well. So you couldn't run and hide in one of those bunkers because it would seep down into those bunkers.
It was nasty shit.
Okay. The other thing about it is that it's not a nerve agent; it's what they call a blister agent. But we'll describe that more when the gas attacks start to happen, and they will happen fairly soon as to what's going on. But one of the things that you can point out as you're seeing through this, right, is you see the pushes back and forth, counterattack, boom, boom, as both sides keep trying to turn the flank. And the whole reason the French are trying to do this at Arras, all right, is basically they're trying to cover this retreat. Okay, they're trying to let the British get back enough to stabilize so that they can create enough of a reserve force here, right, to regain the attack. Now Antwerp, people forget this. Antwerp is a major port. Okay, this is a big operation from a port standpoint, because what does this give? Well, this gives a safe, supposed safe haven, all right, for the high seas fleet if they can ever get around to this point. Now, to be honest, that never happens. One of the main reasons is because the British aren't stupid. They understand that this is a major port, and they basically mine this entire area here. So you know.
So what you're trying to say is that we basically did what the Iranians are doing nowadays. Oh, aren't we heroes?
Well,
Area denial.
Yeah,
exactly. That's exactly what it is.
Here's the thing. Okay, what about just a second?
As the screaming kid screams louder until the taser hits him. I'm joking.
He can't afford a taser. It's just a cattle prod.
Right, they're awesome and just well behaved until I start my show. And then
Isn't that the purpose of children, to disrupt their father? It is Father's Day. They have to let you know. They're here to celebrate Father's Day with you.
But no, okay, here's the question. The Royal Navy, why can't they shell the German line and actually create a way they can make a flanking maneuver from the sea right there? The Royal Navy has superiority, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about that for a second. That's an interesting question. Now, where can they shell? If they're going to shell, it's going to be along the coastline here, which means this edge line here. They're not going to be able to do it in any kind of real depth. I mean, this is hundreds of miles that you're talking about here, right? This is not just hop a skip and a jump. Okay,
and then even then too, like the communications issues and all this kind of stuff, it's not like it is today. It's nowhere near like it is today. And also with close fire support, that didn't really come into a thing until really World War II. And the actual advent of the first computer, basically what happened was when the Americans got their hands on the first computer, the first thing they did was they did tabulation data on fucking trajectories on artillery shells and shit like that. So that from that point on, that's when you do have your Vietnam style, like, fucking Sheldrake, this is 115 mission at, and danger close, and all this kind of shit.
Right,
So,
but you don't have, you're not going to be able to do it as far in depth as you want, right? The way you're thinking about it is, but Farty's 100% right. Coordinating fire control, all right, with a from a naval unit to a ground unit would be exceptionally difficult, all right? Then you have the other aspect of this, okay? Yeah, the British have decent sized guns on their battleships, but the rail guns the Germans could bring up could fire a hell of a lot further. And so all of a sudden now the British ships would be actually in more danger because they could start receiving shell fire, plunging shell fire from from artillery from the Germans at a distance that the British couldn't match. I mean, it's great to sit there and say you got a fleet, but but you can.
Well, that's a fair point. And I was only thinking a mile or two, enough to turn that flank right there, at least at the coastline. If you're lucky, you can start to roll it up. I know war is messy and it won't be that lucky. They would reposition, but it could have at least helped.
If you attempted to do that, here's what would have happened. You would have had a string here, because the Germans would have allowed this. They would have had a string of British all along this edge, and then what they would have done is they would have said, okay, at this point we're going to break it, and now they're screwed. Because they could, like I said, they had the ability to actually break any kind of attempt to try and stabilize this kind of line. They had that kind of artillery. This is not true of other people, all right, of other combatants in the region, all right, or in the war that are going to come into the war. But it's true of the Germans. The Germans had far more powerful artillery, all right, than anybody else in the war. They didn't have necessarily all the best equipment, right? The French 76, which begins this portion of it, is the most field mobile cannon out there. That's accurate, all right? It is probably, at the beginning of the war, the best gun of the war. Now, toward the end of the war, toward the latter 2 years of the war, it's basically, it's not even considered heavy artillery. It's considered light artillery. That's how fast things start changing from an industrial standpoint.
You're right, but I'm going to double down here a little bit, because if the Germans do back off and allow the buffer there, then you could take Zeebrugge and Ostend, right? And then you have more landing zones for the British.
Well, how much more British troops are going to land?
We'd pretty much sent most of it.
Yeah.
You got to remember, Dodge, we're a small country. There's not actually that many of us as such.
When you talk about numbers of people, all right, the British armed forces, their land forces, they don't have the same size land forces that the Germans and the French have. The French can field entire, 3 and 4 and 5, 6 fully equipped armies. The British can equip an expeditionary force, all right, of about 100,000 to 200,000 men. It's considerably smaller than what the Germans are fielding and what the French are fielding from a numbers standpoint. So what are you expecting to land here? Now, if you had the idea of, okay, we can land here and then we can take French troops and we can start moving them around and shuffling them around like that, yeah, but no one's thinking along those lines. Not at this point. No one's thinking about taking the land forces that are here and then walking them all the way back here, putting them on a ship, and then landing them on a boat. And you also got to remember that the landings that you're talking about, there are no landing craft. Okay, at this point in time, nobody's developed landing craft. They don't have where small little boats with 15 or 20 troops in there to go zipping up onto the shoreline, and people run off, and then it pulls back and grabs another 15 more and shoves them in. These are full-blown boats. What they do for landings is that they all get on a boat, they get to the edge, and they all jump off.
They're big bloody lifeboats.
And yeah, that's exactly right. They're bloody lifeboats where you're basically rowing ashore.
Yep.
Is that what you want to be doing, rowing ashore while machine gun nest from the Germans starts to open fire? How would you like to do that?
Or the Turks, because that's what happened. That's exactly what happened in at Tobruk, but that's in a little bit.
Well, yeah, that hasn't quite happened yet. But no. You actually had a German cavalry unit on the 3rd of October had actually taken Ypres, right? And this is where it's going to begin the first battle, because this is the first big counterattack by the British will happen, right? And what you have going on through here, like it shows, back, forth. They take this, they take that, they take this, they take that. All right. In an effort to try and outflank the other. They're really not trying to race to the sea. No one's thinking, okay, let's get to the North Sea. They're just thinking about, okay, this line is stabilized. Let's try to flank. This line is stabilized. Let's try to flank. This line is stabilized. Let's try to flank. Right? That's what they're doing. Both sides. Okay? And there are no people are having to march through this. They're not able. There's no rail lines that they just hop on a rail car, get driven up here, and then jump off. They just don't have that at this point.
Yeah, but doesn't that British counter attack stall out?
So of course it does. Because they don't have the firepower, they don't have the impetus to actually go through this, and the Germans are digging in. They have as many troops as the British do, right? So when the battle begins and the pushback begins, yeah, they're able to take the Ypres back, all right. But the Germans, they're not stupid. They're digging in, and this land is just horrible. This land is just horrible to fight in. Right now, one of the things that has happened is General Foch. I think is that his pronunciation?
Yeah.
Right. Is basically handed command of defending the entire Flanders area, and one of the things that does happen is the British actually conduct an air raid. All right, they actually conduct an air raid all the way to Dusseldorf and Cologne, all right, and they do it with dirigibles, and they attack the aircraft sheds in there, and this begins a little dirigible war, or portion of the war where these basically, you got dirigibles flying missions back and forth against one another.
Kind of awesome, though. You got to admit that, and I realize it's a horrific thing, etc., etc. But can you imagine the beauty of watching those balloons flying over? That must have been actually really awesome to see. Except when they're starting dropping bombs on your ass, but let's ignore that little part. But seeing your own ones taking off and quite stately, I suppose, floating towards the battle lines, and that would be awesome. Sorry, carry on. I'm just
well, it is funny, but I mean, the thing about it is that this is what they're realizing they can drop bombs from the air. Okay, now what ends up happening as time goes forward is the dirigibles, they are very vulnerable to planes. All right, planes are faster, planes are more maneuverable. All right, however, the dirigibles can still fly at night, and so what ends up happening is these raids begin to being conducted at night raids. So both sides will actually conduct dirigible raids at night, and that's when they start putting up barrage balloons and all sorts of stuff. I mean, this is where all this stuff, where all of it comes from, right? The people talk about in World War II, they all come from this aspect. But from the German point of view, this is a major success because they already have Antwerp, they have most of Belgium, and this area now. They weren't able to kick the French out of the war, but the line seems stable enough that they can pivot and start taking the war now to the Russians. Right, and they start fighting more and more towards the Russians. Right, at the start of this battle, basically the British push them back around October 13th and take Ypres back. Okay, from the cavalry unit. The cavalry unit was just there's a screen, right, and the back and forth battle starts on October 21st.
And then lasts for like 3 years. No, I'm kidding. Well, actually, am I kidding?
Much, yeah.
That's
pretty
the
much.
problem. He's making a joke, but it actually was that bad.
Yeah. No, he's right. Now, there are some other things that do happen in here, all right? On October 17th, the HMS Daunted and 4 destroyers, all right, with 4 German destroyers off the Dutch coast, all right, begin an engagement. It's a small engagement, all right? But during that engagement, the Germans actually are able to successfully sink, all right, some of the British ships. I think the HMS Hawk is sunk in the North Sea by a German submarine. Now, why is this important? This has a major effect because this is a warship now that got sunk by a sub. This has a major effect on the thinking, the strategic thinking of Jellicoe, who's the I think he's not the first Sea Lord. He's the first Lord of the what is he? The guy in charge.
First Lord of the Admiralty.
Okay, yeah, okay. So he's the one basically in charge of the British ships. Okay, and so he becomes very, I don't want to say frightened, but he becomes concerned about the effectiveness of German submarines. They're because it's something that pops up out of nowhere. Nobody knows how effective these things can be, in an engagement on engagement type of environment. All right. All they know is that these things could pop up out of anywhere. All right, and do damage with their torpedoes. Okay, so this is one of the reasons why you see Jellicoe take a lot of the steps that he does and why he doesn't try to push a more aggressive stance in the North Sea.
Yeah, no, the submarines the U-boats will more and more become pivotal for the German effort in the ocean, at least, because they don't move their actual fleet ever.
Right. And the other thing that is beginning to happen that's positive from the British perspective is their colonies now. The troops from their colonies begin arriving. The first Canadians begin to arrive on the continent. All right. The first Indian contingent begins to arrive actually in Egypt. Okay. So the colonies now are starting to have an effect. They're starting to increase the overall manpower. All right. But for the most part, they're never going to be to the point where you end up with, simply because of the distances and the logistics. It's never going to be the type of size and breadth that you see from the Germans or the French at this point in the war. But the British do start to, these things do start to take place. Also, the first German plane, the reconnaissance plane, has been shot down, and so it's beginning. Okay. The air war is starting to heat up slowly as they start shooting at one another. Initially, they were flying back and forth. The reconnaissance planes from both sides are flying back and forth across the battlefields, and they're waving at one another. They're seeing the other pilots, and they're waving to them as they wave back as they fly back and forth past one another.
Well, that changes rapidly. When it comes to Belgium, there's only a piece of Belgium still unoccupied. They capitulate completely, don't they?
Well, they don't capitulate. They form a government in absentia, just like the Poles do in World War II. They basically, Belgium is conquered, but the Belgium basically, they say that we're not truly conquered. We're just, we have our government in exile.
Yeah, government in exile. That's exactly what I was going to say. Let's take a look at the chat here. We got Eldritch God up in there. What's up? He's working on the next Red Eye Rants video, so that'll be coming out sometime soon. We got Flying Falcon in there, Lonely Wolf. Hope you guys are all having a good day. Happy Father's Day to any fathers out there. All right, so that's pretty much the battle in the West, right? Because I'm guessing the dotted line was the run to the sea, and the solid, that line has been established for quite a while, right?
Yes, those are the lines as they're permanently established. Now, one of the things that I would also note, all right, and this is important to note because it's part of the effect. Sir, I think his first name was Charles. Sir Douglas, from the Chief of the Imperial General Staff for Great Britain, is killed in combat.
That must have been a blow to the home front. Jensen, what are your thoughts on that? And I'm sure you learned about it in history class in school, right?
Well, let's be completely blunt. To the soldiers, they probably didn't really give a toss. But obviously, the upper class, i.e., the higher ranks, they would have been absolutely appalled that something like that has happened. My God, one of our people have been taken down. How dare they? They. The problem was communication was an issue. So I suppose it could be looked at as a good thing for one simple reason. At least the demoralization effect didn't necessarily spread as far.
Yeah, that's a good point because nowadays, if General Petraeus, when he was in Iraq during the surge or Afghanistan, whichever one it was, I don't remember right now. MC will probably hate me for it, but whatever. If he was killed in action, we would have known that almost instantly, and it would have been very demoralizing, especially to the Bush presidency at the time, right, MC?
It would have been a blow. It would have been interesting to see how the U.S. would have reacted. Someone from a general staff hasn't been killed in actual combat for a long time now, right? They die periodically in plane crashes, in helicopter crashes, but as far as an actual combat casualty, all right, the closest we came was losing a general in Afghanistan.
Yeah, no, and that could be very demoralizing to the war effort at home overall. Go ahead, Farty.
Oh, well, in the interest of continuity, it wouldn't really do that much. But yeah, I suppose to the people who actually knew the bloke, they'd probably be a bit bummed.
Well, but it also has the other effect of, okay, now we're going to fight harder for this guy. Remember the person who died. Remember his sacrifice. Blah blah blah. Right.
Yeah.
Those kind of speeches are, that they seem to roll off the tip of the tongue of these guys, and from officers very very easily and very glibly. So,
no, and we're still talking about the fucking Alamo. I mean, ask any Texan.
Yeah. And since Farty's here, there is one other thing that does happen during this time frame, which is the only attack that happens in the Australian waters is a battle with a German gunboat, which is then captured.
Well, is this the one down in Victoria?
I don't know if it was the German gunboat, the Comet. It's captured by the Noosa near Talesia or Taliesia. I can't pronounce it.
I'll have to look it up.
But that's the only that shows you the extent of the German high seas fleet. Really, there are some things that are the Germans do have some pocket shit that's out there, but really not much.
Actually, there is an incident around about this time in the proceeds too, where the HMAS Sydney came across a merchant raider, the SMS Emden, and they didn't know that it was a commerce raider, and they got within a couple of 100 feet, and all of a sudden, fuck shit, they all both started shooting each other. The Emden sunk the HMAS Sydney, and we only just found it about 10 years ago. So there's big thing about that.
Well, when did you guys put an end to the Emden? Because you guys chased the Emden pretty quickly, didn't you?
Yeah, no. We in the first opening exchange, basically the Emden fucked us, and we basically gave her a mortal wound. She went away and sank later on.
Oh, okay. So it's basically a tie.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's fine. I love the way you put that. Sorry, but that's funny.
Well, how was he going to put it? Both sides sank one another. Next.
Someone needs to be a runner-up.
I mean, how would you judge that, Judson?
No, I don't disagree. It was just the way you put it. It was so very. It was a tie.
like a ball game. Well,
In all
I mean,
fairness,
go ahead.
all right. What I was going to say is, in all fairness, it's not actually necessarily the loss of the ship. It's how much the loss of that ship actually affects your opponent. After all, if they've only got one ship, then that's still a win for you. You may have lost something big, but you've still got other ships that can take its place.
That's a good point. That's a very good point. Strategically, how many Emdens did the Germans really have? They really don't. They've got. They still I think have the gas spree out there, all right, but not much else. And the gas spree attacks Tahiti. Like, okay, what's going to be the strategic damage to France because you attack Tahiti? Okay, it sounds good. I mean, it makes the papers. It looks really good in that regard that the ship, this German ship, a commerce raider for all intents and purposes, is able to attack and so forth. But from a material standpoint, did it have any real effect on the war? All right, or any strategic effect on the war? Not really. All right, because okay, what's in Tahiti? I mean, at the time, it was just a coal refueling station, if I'm not mistaken. So, okay, they attack Tahiti, they blow up the fueling station, and then they leave. Okay. Did it stop anything? Did it stop the British from going anywhere? Now, when it tries to return to the Atlantic, it has a slight effect in that the British say, okay, we're going to dispatch some ships to make sure that we sink that son of a bitch. But aside from that, it's not the material effect from the strategic standpoint of the war is pretty much minimal. And you were wondering, Mad Dodge, about what could the British Navy do? Why could they couldn't bombard? The British can bombard from the sea, but they can't stay there. They can just basically lob shells. So after the Germans take this area here and take both of these here, every now and then the British Navy will come out and shell these areas and then retreat, and then they'll come back and shell these areas before they can be damaged again. So they're not ignoring it, but you also got to remember at the same time they're doing that, the Germans are doing the same thing on the British Isles. Several British towns get shelled by German ships.
I wish I would have found this a few episodes ago, but this is interesting. The newspaper from 1st of August, 1914, and the way we were looking at it here in America. And is it bad that I see the baseball thing and I'm squinting trying to see how the Dodgers were doing?
I knew it. I bloody knew it.
The Brooklyn Dodgers? There's not even an LA Dodgers in there. What the hell are you in New York now?
They lost.
Well, they were called bums at that time. In fact, they were known never to win anything at this point in time in baseball history, if you really want to know the truth of the matter.
So pretty much the same as nowadays then.
Yeah, pretty much. not much different. But
I'm sorry, Dodge.
So Dodge just likes them because they're consistent, eh?
Yeah. In all fairness,
at least you're not calling it rounders now, Mad Dodge. Come on, you should take the win where you can.
No. My daughter just started screaming her head off, so I lift her up gently and go to your room, and then she screams louder down the hallway like I beat her or something. I didn't even touch her. Like, go to your room if you're gonna cry.
I didn't hit her. No, really, I didn't hit her. I didn't. No. Oh, hi, Mark.
No. If I would have fucking spanked her, I could see why she would cry like that. But it's ridiculous. Heroes at Serbia. What? That's
No.
You got to remember, everyone's looking at the at this point in time when people are talking about this. The Serbs, of course, are basically surrounded. Okay, they're already completely surrounded by the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire is now pushing into Serbian territory. Right? It's not
kicked off in the colonies in on the African continent or anywhere else.
Not just yet. Not just yet.
No, it's basically what's happening there is everything is quiet up until the end of the month, and I think it's October 27th, when the Ottoman Turks decide to enter the war on the side of the Germans and the Austrian Hungarians.
And that battle when that Churchill fumbles, that
Gallipoli.
yeah, oh man,
Yeah, that doesn't happen until August next year. In this timeline.
Well, that's not going to that isn't going to take place for a while yet. You got to remember the Gallipoli campaign when they talk about it is an effort to try and break the stalemate in Europe, right? It's an effort to try and open up another front, right? To divert attention from what's been happening, right? To divert what's been going on, right? That's the intent at that point. Okay.
So on the Russian front, in the month of October 1914, what are we looking at?
Say that again.
On the Russian front.
Oh, on the Russian front, really, what you see is the Russians have pulled back. All right, and both the Germans and the Russian forces have pulled back a little bit to reconsolidate after the heavy fighting at Tannenberg. Okay, the beating at Tannenberg was a huge blow, but the Russians are like, okay, let's try to recover from this. Okay.
Here's a question. Here's a question then. What happens when two armies engage and then they fall back and maybe there's a town in the middle? Wouldn't you be fucking trying to get the hell up out of that town, right?
Well, sure you would be.
Yeah.
The question is where are you going to go?
Well, here's another thing too. Like another aspect that doesn't really ever get mentioned is that they're like, whilst the Germans were doing this, there were like refugees, like people who just grabbed whatever they can. You know, there's footage of this, black and white footage. A little old lady with this big bloody bundle of fucking what looks like clothes and shit. You know, just hobbling down the roads, miles upon miles of people. The Germans utilised this again in World War II. But this time they weaponized the refugee streams by trying to machine gun them from the air to try and get them to get in the way of advancing Allied troops that were coming up to try and stop the Germans. Things like that. But yeah, there were refugees. Yeah.
Yeah, no, but that's a very good point. We haven't mentioned them. We should have. As these troops are moving, people are packing up en masse, and they're making huge lines. I mean, miles upon miles of people trying to exit the area. Okay, and of course, you know, they're doing exactly what Farty said. They're packing everything they can. They're in carts or they're on foot with big bundles of whatever they can carry, right? And they're slowly walking toward whatever line they think will offer them the most security. And generally, of course, everyone's afraid of the Germans, so they tend to be walking away from the Germans. But that's just a tendency for the most part at this point in the war.
Okay, well then here's a follow-up question. As these refugee lines hit the battle lines, do they let them through? Because if you do, you could be letting spies through as well.
Of course, they're letting them through.
Well, yeah, and there's no sort of issue about spies or anything at this point in time because, well, you're simply having two armies coming towards each other and they're going to fight as they see each other. There's not really much point on sending a spy towards the lines that it's only going to get met by your own troops and hopefully decimated anyways.
Are you sure though? Because even in the Civil War, we had spies on both sides, and there was stalemates like this, kind of. kind of.
Yeah, but
On
but that's a different situation entirely.
Hmm.
Okay, I mean that is more. This is. You got to remember, if you're going to put troops into fleeing refugees, you're going to put the spies into there. You've got to get them ahead of your line of advance, right? So that's not something easy to do at the beginning of the outbreak of hostilities.
I mean, you could send fifth columnists to go and sabotage, but like fucking the things are a bit too confusing for all of this shit at the moment. Enough as it is. There's no real point on it. Like in say the Civil War, for example, like the whole effort was to try and find your weak points and your defense, like breaches in the defense and all that kind of stuff. Here, the whole German line was supposed to be the thing that smashes your weak points and your thing. You were all the weak point, kind of thing.
But okay, for the first battle of Ypres, all right, just to let you know how devastating this battle is, all right. The British Expeditionary Force suffers around 75,000 men, okay, in casualties. The Germans suffered 135,000 men in casualties.
and the casualty list includes wounded, right?
Yes, killed and wounded. So
that is astronomical. First off, second, I just wanted it clarified for anybody that comes and watches this later, and they don't know what a casualty list entails.
right. No, but these are massive. All right, the scales are just the beginnings. Okay, and that's the sad part about all of this, right? This is for a month of fighting or so. You end up with 75,000 casualties. All right, or 135,000 casualties. The whole United States Army, all right, right now with everything is less than 500,000. So you're talking something that would take a quarter of the manpower, and you have removed them in the first month of battle.
Well, and let's talk about the United States again. Okay, is the military recruiting just in case, or are they keeping the isolationist tone and tenor?
No, there's an ice. They're keeping the isolationist tone. In fact, they get to the point where they sign a deal with the Panama Canal to say either side can use the Panama Canal. It won't be restricted. All right. It's just that if you're going to use the canal and you're one of the belligerents, you have to promise when you're within the Panama Canal zone, you will not engage in battle.
What if somebody would have broken that? What could we really have done?
We could have said, okay, you're no longer going to use the Panama Canal.
And how would we enforce that?
Use the U.S. Navy.
You just seal the locks. It's real easy.
Yeah, you just put U.S. battleships either side of it.
Well, the United States Navy was, in comparison to the Royal Navy of the time, was pitiful. So that's why I'm saying the United States didn't really have the force projection.
Yes, it did. Okay, the United States had battleships at this point. You had the White Fleet. Okay, it wasn't on par with the British fleet, no, but it was significant. To say that the United States did not have firepower in the form of battleships is really a misnomer.
You were getting to the technology of the USS Arizona from Pearl Harbor, which was pretty bloody good at the time.
That's kind of the stereotype of the time, though. That's the way the rest of the world was looking at the United States. They can't do nothing, right? We were merchants. We were fucking Yankee traders.
No, yeah. Battleship Arizona was pretty good fucking ship for its time. That's the vintage you get into.
Well, you're not quite there, but yeah, you are getting. The ships that we had were not. Well, they may not have been up to par in comparison to the British and the German ships. All right, but they weren't dog food either. Okay, and the United States, when you talk about force projection, all right, getting to the Panama Canal is a hell of a lot easier for the United States to get there than either the Germans or the British. Now, let's be honest. What's the effect of the United States allowing traffic through the Panama Canal to the belligerents? Well, the effect is very simple. The Germans, they don't really have much in the way of shipping, so it doesn't really help them at all. All right, but it does help the British to be able to switch from one theater, the Atlantic, into the Pacific and vice versa as they need to.
So this really was a strategic move by the president at the time, which was Wilson, right?
Correct. Woodrow Wilson is the president.
Yep, that's right. So this was a move by Wilson to kind of support the British, but not look like he's supporting the British, right?
Well, in a way, I mean, you're reasserting, U.S. neutrality, and you're saying, look, we'll let either side go under these rules. Yeah, it only affects one side, really, but that's not our fault.
It was actually a good move on his part. Let's be completely honest.
Yeah, no, and funny you started talking, Jensen, because I was going to you, because this is where Cabby would have started railing against the United States for being neutral. What say you on United States neutrality at the beginning of the war? Well, let's be honest, the majority of the war.
Okay, I will actually answer that. But unlike Cabby, who, like you said, would go into one, I actually think that America pretty much did the right thing. At the end of the day, America didn't know who was going to win. And because it wasn't actually directly involved in the war itself, well, you're not going to play your hand until you know who's going to be the winner. That's why there was a whole bunch of rumors that you guys were actually shipping equipment off to the Germans. Now, I don't know if that's true. To
an extent, that was true. To an extent, we were there. There were a number of ores, specifically nickel, all right, that were desperately needed by the Germans, and we had sent a number of merchant ships to the Germans in an attempt to deliver those goods. They didn't make it past the blockade by the British, all right, but the reality is we were shipping it there. Okay, so from that standpoint, you could say, yeah. But the other thing to remember that people forget, that the United States and the British were not nearly as closely aligned. In fact, we weren't aligned at all at this point in time. Many people in the United States still looked at the British as our number one enemy, as our number one competitor, our number one enemy. Okay,
yeah.
People don't think about that, but it's very true. And there was a large German, migrant population in the United States they wanted us to join the war on the German side. Now, the counterbalance to that was at the time, all right, while we never looked at the British really as much of an ally up to this point, France, we still had a very very positive view of France as a whole, as France as a nation. They were a popular, all right, they were popular in the American way of thinking. And this was one, if you take a look at the time period, what are they all talking about? You don't see people talking about London as much as they talk about Paris. You see them talking about Gay Paris and helping the French defeat the German Huns and things like that, more so than you have go out there and help the British hold them at bay. Of course, there's a lot of I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, well, yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you while you were on a roll. I got up and got the kids something to eat. But I just wanted to ask Jensen, because I heard what you were talking about. And Jensen, was England actually scared of a German invasion during World War I? World War II is a different matter completely. But yeah. World War I, were you guys actually worried? How would they land their forces even?
We wasn't as worried as we was in World War II. To be honest, the British we've always been a stubborn little bunch of assholes. So there was some of us that were literally sitting here doing the come and have a go if you think you're hard enough. Because, like, not everyone that could go over did. We still had, for want of a better term, home guard. We still had the people that stayed back and were protecting the women and the children. Obviously, you know, it makes sense. You don't want the enemy charging up. We were more concerned about the Germans heading along. I believe the Thames was considered our major threat zone, that they could turn up and, well, let's be fair, if they sent a battleship up there, they could bomb the living shit out of London and do a huge amount of damage. You got to remember the dock works were literally right attached to the Thames.
How deep is the Thames, though? Can a battleship have the displacement within that river?
There's a battleship there currently, the HMS Belfast.
I don't know how deep the Thames is, to be honest. So, okay, I got you.
Okay, no, it's literally, we actually have a battleship there. So, yeah, it is actually deep enough for them to head up. I mean, obviously, I can't detail how it was back then, but right now, yes, it is deep enough.
Well, so it's still one of your major transportations for goods, isn't it? Is it one of your major logistic areas? So that thing was constantly, if I'm not mistaken, don't they constantly dredge that area to make sure it's cleaned and ready to go?
Yes.
So I would think that they still would have been able to move shipping and everything there. Now, of course, to get through there, to actually come up to Thames, they would have to go through, a whole series of booms and so forth and defensives. It's very unlikely that the Germans were going to sail a ship up the Thames. But
that's the thing. Although they wouldn't necessarily be able to do it that easily, the fear of them doing it was the one thing that existed.
Well, that was true, and the British did have a fairly healthy respect for the German Navy. In fact, the British had more respect for the German Navy than they did for the American Navy. By far.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to kind of point out earlier. I know I went overboard, but I knew you would back it off of that, which is why I did. Once again, we might be talking history, but we are a radio show. So, but the thing is also, I know it's World War II, but America had that same irrational fear on the west coast of the Japanese. You know what I mean? And all they could really do is send some fucking balloon bombs over. Most of them didn't even fucking explode. But still, the west coast, like California especially, there's the Battle of LA, right? Where they're shooting at fucking nothing. Well, I say they're shooting at those, but other people say nothing.
Well, there's a lot of debate on what they were shooting at. Obviously, there was no, there was nothing really of note per se there. Okay, that anybody can point to. They did attack with some balloons. There was an American killed by one of those attacks. Actually, I think in Oregon or Washington, on one of those balloon bombs. But there was an irrational fear, and the reason for that was we had lost our entire freaking battleship fleet for all intents and purposes at Pearl Harbor. Everyone was expecting that during World War II, and I realize that we're getting a little sidetracked here, but in World War II, a lot of Americans were expecting a follow-up attack and the invasion of Pearl Harbor and the invasion of the Hawaiian Islands.
In all fairness, I'm surprised they didn't.
They knew they couldn't. But they did take United States territories.
I don't know if I agree with that. I think that the Japanese, if they had wanted to, could have done it, and in hindsight, probably should have made a play for it.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like I said, I'm surprised they actually didn't.
No, but there's the naval base down in San Diego, and there's one in the Pacific Northwest. I believe in Washington. I don't think it's in Oregon, but I don't know. I don't know if they could have did it.
Well, the thing is once you take the land, right? Because we didn't have the troops there at the time. Once you take the land, taking it back becomes very problematic, and it would have had to have been taken back if we were going to continue. The other thing is where it was strategically, all right, was in such a place that it would have hampered any support we could have given to the Australians.
Yeah, but no, if Japan, okay, let's say they invade Oregon, they would make it as far as the Cascades and no further.
Oh no! I'm just talking Hawaii. All right.
Okay. They could have had the chance to take Hawaii. You're right. Okay.
Right, and it would have hampered the war effort. It would have been from a strategic standpoint. It would have been a good strategic move on their part. But no, you're right. They would not have. They were never going to attempt a landing on the West Coast. They logistically they just didn't have the capability of doing something like that. That's very true.
But no, as much as I love World War II, that's a series for another time.
Just real quick, the Japanese did take some of the Aleutian Islands at one point.
Didn't they take Guam too? They took some U.S. territory.
No, the Aleutians. There's little string of islands at the top of Alaska. That's like between Alaska and Russia.
Yes,
So
they did take some of the Aleutian Islands, but then again, the Aleutian Islands weren't defended really.
No.
And I think there's some rocks in the middle of that sea in between us and Russia. I mean, that Sarah Palin can see from her doorway.
So technically, they did get your West Coast.
And the thing about that was they were taken actually as a feint maneuver by the Japanese to try and cover their Midway landing. They didn't realize that their whole plan had been compromised.
Okay, Falcon brings up they didn't take our carriers. You know, since we're going down this rabbit hole, let's entertain it for a minute here. Why were the carriers out of port? They should have been there, right?
Actually, no. I mean, the idea was the only time you were going to bring the carrier in port at that point, once war had been declared, is they had already determined that they don't want the carriers in port. They want them covering these areas. That was as soon as they were thinking there was a war, they wanted to try and blunt this attack. They did not want them in port. They were constant on constant exercises out in the Pacific already.
Well, then why was half of our Navy stationed at Pearl Harbor? The
Navy was stationed there and the battleships were stationed there, but because no one thought that they would actually attack. All right, but as far as the carriers go, the carriers have planes. They were going to use the carriers as a screening force. You got to remember how the United States was looking at the carriers at this point in time. They weren't looking at the carriers as the primary attack means. They were looking at carriers as a subsidiary of the rest of the forces, and their primary purpose was find the enemy. That's the way that was thinking.
You know what? Yeah, but you know my insinuation there was that conspiracy theory that we let Pearl Harbor happen. We just sat back on our hands and we're like, we won a war. FDR let it happen. That's the theory. I'm not saying it's true, but that is the theory.
The evidence of that is basically saying, well, look, you know, we could have done something ahead of time. We knew what the things were going to be. To be honest, if that's the theory, then they did a real shit job of not just with the Philippines, or not just with the Pearl Harbor, but by letting the Philippines hang out in the wind like that with MacArthur and leaving MacArthur to actually go into a shell. All right. MacArthur was of course one of our better commanders because he was always so aggressive. But when battle first began and Pearl Harbor got hit, he actually had a series of times where he didn't know what to do, and he did not attack the way he should have. He did not react aggressively.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. But another piece of evidence they bring up is the telegram. 24 hours before the attack, about a intercepted message warning of attack, and then I would follow that up with a question: weren't we watching the Japanese embassy? Didn't we see them clearing everything out and get ready to fucking leave?
Yeah, but that doesn't tell you where they're going to attack.
That's a damn good indication.
Not to where. Not to where they're going to attack.
I'm just saying, like, you're in the middle of peace talks, right? You're like, hey, we don't want to fight you. We don't want to, oh, no, everything's good. And then, you know, a guy walks in, he's like, hey, pack up the embassy. Yeah, everything's fine. Yeah, right, bud.
No, I think the American forces, the American commanders at the time, believed that the Japanese were going to stage an attack, but they were not thinking that they were going to stage an attack at Pearl Harbor. And as a result, they were caught flat-footed because they as much as they were thinking, okay, we'll use the carriers as a screening force and everything else, it was more as a pro forma because they didn't really believe. You got to remember, the attitude was basically, okay, well, we're not going to really believe that war has started until the war has actually started. There's this belief that, yeah, they may do this. Yeah, you know, something could happen. You're warned. Yeah, you know, this is the Navy's being told, yeah, they could be coming. Yeah, but they're not going to attack us. The Japanese aren't foolish enough to do this. And quite frankly, there was another aspect of it was they never looked at the Japanese as having a first-rate Navy to begin with because of their own stupidity. The United States Navy forces at the time believed that the Japanese forces were inferior. All right, in both capability and morale, they really did.
Morale? That was a stupid assumption.
I'm just telling you how because a lot of it has to do with racism.
And even still,
bigotry at the time.
And even still, the actual capabilities of the ships themselves. I mean, like quite a few of them came from British designs.
Yeah, there was that as well. You got to remember, the United States had been watching the buildup of the Japanese and where was their focus. Their focus up to that point had been, and I realize that we're changing this from a World War I stream to a World War II stream. All right, but the focus of the Japan at that point had been China, in the Chinese frontier. It wasn't west. It wasn't eastern from their perspective, western from our perspective. You know, I mean, they weren't expecting them to come toward us. They were expecting them to continue to deal with the crap going on down south. Now, everyone believed at some point in time that the Japanese were going to attack the British. Okay.
Well, real quick, MC. Jensen, thanks for joining. Any last thoughts? I do have one last question before you go. Your relative, you said that he signed up early. He was 13. Obviously, he survived. Did he come home all there? Did they tell stories? Was he shell-shocked at all, or?
He was shell-shocked, but actually not for the same way that you would expect. You got to remember, because he was towing the guns around, he was right next to them while they were being used as well. So he was getting his shell-shock, funnily enough, but for the weapons he was actually traveling with. And yes, he did get back. His lungs were absolutely shot, though. He was coughing for from what I was told, he was coughing for the rest of his life. And like I said, he was actually coughing up bits of his own lungs. Wow.
But thank you for sharing the story of your relative. I have no relatives that fought in that war. I do in the Civil War, but not World War I. Thank you very much. Have a good night. If you're up later, or in the morning or whatever.
Yep.
Then hit me up. So
I will do. Thank you for having me, guys. I'm sorry, but I have to go to bed at this point.
See you, mate.
Okay. Bye-bye, everyone.
But no, if you want to continue talking about World War II for a little bit, I'm fine with that. Any last thoughts on World War I real quick, though?
Well, for the Battle of Wipers, basically, it firmly stabilizes the lines. Like I said, at the end of the month, I guess it was the 29th, actually, not the 27th. Turkey joins the Central Axis powers, right? Declares for them.
Let's talk about that. They joined the Central Powers. They joined Germany.
Correct.
The attitude in Great Britain and in Australia, party, right? You're a part of the Commonwealth, or no, you were a colony still then, right?
No. 1901, we got our independence, so we're part of the Commonwealth, but yeah, we're not a colony.
What the rest of the world think, politically, when all of a sudden the Ottomans jump in? That's an old ass empire. They're the ones that sacked, freaking Constantinople to begin with and took out the Byzantines. That would be a little intimidating, just right offhand, right?
Well, it was just like for us, it was just another part of the enemy, the dirty Turks, basically. Yep, the dirty Turks are in. Yep, can't trust the Turks.
Well, the big effect, of course, is from the standpoint of the Allies, is the entry of the Turks on the side of the Central Powers denies them a logistics capability to help the Russians. They can't float ships over to the Russians. They can't float goods and material to the Russians.
How long is that border between the Ottomans at the time and Russia?
I mean, it's pretty significant. I mean, they have you got to remember, it also borders the Austro-Hungarian groups, Romania, and so forth are all a part of that as well. So, if you look at it from the Black Sea, right? You got to look at it that the Black Sea is right there on Russia, and now all of a sudden the major port of Sevastopol can't be utilized, right? Plus the fact that the Russian Navy is now that was in Sevastopol is completely bottled up. It can't help with any of the Mediterranean operations to try and attempt another front against the Germans in other areas.
Yeah, this had to put a real strain on the Tsar, right?
Yes, this is devastating for the Tsar, right? They had been making some headway, all right, against the Austrians, all right, which then had to be taken care of and helped out by the Germans, right? So that's where the Germans are having an effect. But overall, the devastation on the Russians is significant.
Yeah, and this is all going to lead to what eventually happens in Russia. There's a certain revolution that's going to end up happening because right now, in Russia, they are going around to all these small villages and stuff and just conscripting people, right?
Right now, what's happening is the peasantry is basically being mobilized and then put in the Tsar's army. And it's the great Russian, patriotic fervor. The problem is, of course, they don't have the material and they don't have the equipment. I mean, they don't even have food for these guys, let alone uniforms and rifles for everyone, plus artillery and modern artillery and so forth. So yeah, you can put a lot of men under arms, but what are those arms really worth? But at the same time, I mean, it's war. They're under mobilization.
Yeah, but here's the thing. You're going to get a sentiment as a lot of these guys start to desert later on. And you have the women left at home with no husband around. You have they were conscripting people as young as 15, right?
They're grabbing anybody they thought was a male, and then that could grab a rifle. Yeah, pretty much.
The effect is going to lead to a gigantic shift in Russia that will last for how long?
Yes, and no. It isn't so much that the conscription is going to have; it's how utterly defeated and how utterly horrible, all right, the generals are. the Russian leadership is just so corrupt and so bad that they are just the losses and the deprivation suffered by the Russian peasantry is just horrifying. It's horrifying to even think of it to this day. That's what had the effect.
Didn't Stalin serve and then desert?
I assume that a number of them were actually part of it initially. Yeah, I don't know about Stalin per se. I haven't looked into Stalin's background that closely, to be honest. But that will play into this. But at this point in time, the Russians are attempting to do two things. One, they're attempting to create a front against the Austro-Hungarians, which now they've got to extend that front to include the Turks that are looking at this as a chance to take back some of the land that they had lost in previous battles with the Russians. But they're also still trying. You got to remember, Russia entered the war on behalf of Serbia. They're trying to save Serbia. So they're
but Serbia is completely surrounded and they can't bust through that line. So they really needed a shift in mindset, right?
Well, I mean, yeah, they could have sat there and told the frickin'. I mean, to be honest, the whole war wouldn't have started if they'd have given up on Serbia at the beginning and said, "Well, Serbia's on its own. Sucks to be you." There wouldn't even have been a war. If they'd have told the Serbs to go kiss it, and it looks like you screwed up, bud, and went about their own way, there wouldn't have been a war at all because there would have been no reason for the Germans to mobilize because the Russians wouldn't have mobilized. It was the Russian mobilization that kicked off the German mobilization.
And it was a domino effect from there. We covered that in the very first episode. Absolutely. Russia's making some gains in a few areas, but now you have the Turks join.
Yep.
And that extends the line for hundreds, if not 1,000 miles, right?
Right.
So,
but it does also then leave an opportunity for the Allies to attack Turkey, and they will begin to do that through Africa and so forth.
All right. Anything else you want to comment on, or we'll leave it there and maybe touch upon World War II for the last half an hour just for fun, and then move on to.
No, I think we're done for covering this portion of at the beginning of it. To be honest, for World War One, I don't want to go forward any further on that.
All right, so next week we will be covering November 1914. Winter will start to set in. Russia should be fun next month. But, fun in the snow, guys. Let's go skiing. But no, World War II, like, we were talking about something really interesting in the Pearl Harbor attack, and the theory. I'm not going to say the first part of it because YouTube. But the theory of FDR just allowing it to happen. He just sat back because he wanted war and the American public didn't. They'd already been through World War One. They had already had the stock market crash. They were not in the mood to fight.
Okay, that's all true, right? You got to remember that the war had been going on since the 30s. Right, it's now 1941, right? America has created the Lend-Lease Act to basically help the British, all right, stave off the Germans, all right. Although technically we're not at war, our destroyers are also being utilized in anti-submarine, warfare tactics, right? That is taking place. Okay, so yeah. You have Roosevelt talking about how America is going to become the arsenal of democracy.
Yeah, but
as far as the Japanese,
well, real quick, at the same time though, you have the giant Nazi or National Socialist Party of America march. Was it in D.C. or New York? I believe it was New York, wasn't it? Don't they march at Madison Square Garden?
Yeah, the Nazis do have a following. That's very true. There are people that do like the ring of fascism. They look at fascism fondly with a leadership type of principle. Is that antithetical to the United States? Yeah, but at the same time, they're looking at it from the perspective of, okay, you elect the leader and you keep re-electing the leader, right? They're not looking at it as a form of a dictatorship.
MC, they filled Madison Square Garden.
Of course.
Fathom that for a second.
Okay, and got to remember also the KKK had just had its highest rating, and the KKK, a member of the KKK, openly, all right, has been elected the governor of Indiana.
Are you talking about a certain fan, or Hillary is a fan of?
No. In Indiana, at this point in time, the heyday of the KKK, basically their high watermark is 1924. Right, so they are still a major force to be reckoned with, and they had basically taken over Indiana politics. All right, they were basically the power player in the state of Indiana. They have mayors, they have city aldermen, they've got state senators and so forth, and there's not much difference. And then when you have the actual Nazi movement take place, all right, basically with the German immigrants. All right, they made a very easy fix, all right, or an easy fit rather, all right, with the National Socialists. So it doesn't surprise me that they were able to have that much power. You got to remember that at the beginning of all this, people are not looking at fascism with the same idea, with the same lens that we look at it today. All right, people were looking at Mussolini. What Mussolini had done in Italy was considered, a miracle. Okay, the fact that they were fighting against the communists. Okay, this is all a positive.
Yeah, no, and this is a thing, man. If you look at the United States and its demographics and quote unquote melting pot, you have all this German population siding with Germany. You have the Italian population siding with Mussolini. You have the Japanese population that then get rounded up and put in the fucking camps. I mean, holy shit, was America a mess?
Well, there are some things that do happen. I mean, the idea is that the people tend to gloss over some of those facts as if they speak for themselves without really fully exploring the context of those things. All right. And all of that is true. All right. But people weren't supporting the Nazis because the Nazis were German. They were supporting the Nazis because they liked the Nazi ideology of the one leader principle, right? And how quickly they could rebuild things. You got to remember, we're still in the very end throes of the Great Depression. The Germans, through the Nazi movement, had shown, all right, they were in a deep depression, and look how they got out of it. They elected Adolf Hitler, and Adolf Hitler came in there, and look how much better that they're doing. They're building roads, and people are having vacations. They're seeing this on they're hearing about this on the radio. They're seeing this in the movie theaters as the German propagandists are talking about how now people can go to the North Sea for vacations and look at how they're building things and all the new renovations and look at the wonderful planes that they're building. And they're even able to fly a dirigible. Oh, well, sorry, that one kind of blew up. But they were able to fly a dirigible all the way from Europe over to the United States.
Yeah, no, and didn't Amelia Earhart just disappear a little bit before the kickoff of the war, right?
Oh yeah, she did. I mean, she was trying to be the first woman to fly around the world, and she was on a part of her Pacific leg, and her plane is never found.
I say she got captured by the Japanese. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people believe that. That is also one of the theories that's been promulgated out there, that she actually was on a spying mission for the U.S. State Department and the U.S. government, and was actually taking pictures of and doing flyovers of Japanese installations, and the Japanese captured her, and she spent the rest of the war in a Japanese internment camp and died in a Japanese internment camp during the war.
That's a real theory. I haven't heard that one.
Oh yeah.
I pulled that shit out of my ass. God damn.
No, that's a real theory, and it has been promulgated. I don't know how much water it holds, to be honest, but
Actually, it doesn't hold that much water because here recently, in the last couple of years, on an island in the Pacific, they found a piece of what looks to be her airplane and one grave on the island. She had a co-pilot with her. One of them might have died. You know what I mean?
Well,
And-
I'd say, considering the time that it's been, I'd say both of them have probably died by now.
Smart ass.
yeah, they'd be kind of old now. So, unfortunately, I'm going to have to leave right now because my daughter has asked me to drive her somewhere. So, unfortunately, I have to leave. So.
Oh, well, then we'll go ahead and wrap it up. But thank you, everybody, for coming out this week. I'll be back tomorrow. We'll do some more news. We'll be checking up on the Iran thing. I'm keeping it, keeping up on it. And other stuff, maybe censorship as usual. Thank you, MC and Farty, for joining. Eldritch is working on the next Red Eye Rants, editing it together. We'll be throwing that up in the next day or maybe later today. Who knows? Good night. Good luck. And we now love France. And we love YouTube. And please don't censor us. Bye.